5 books and counting. The Tales from the Omni Vault continues to expand as a universe. Go ahead and check the links down in the description to get your copies today. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni Viewer, and I owe the inspiration for this particular video to C. Animus, who recently has been releasing videos about Kong's portrayal in the monsterverse. Interesting channel, by the way. You should check him out. But anyway, one of the things he did in one of his recent videos was pointing out different points in Godzilla vs. Kong where he tried to stay balanced in terms of good moments and bad moments, but since he doesn't really like Godzilla vs. Kong, and, you know, that's his right to do, he saw there were a lot of moments throughout the movie that he felt didn't really make sense for Kong's portrayal. And I decided to respond to one of those points in particular down in the comments, and I got thinking and I realized maybe this could actually be a good video subject for people to get thinking about things. So here we are. Now, the main thrust of the idea is that there are various things in certain stories that might go unexplained or might be portrayed in a way that could obscure the meaning, or there's stuff that might be determined to be a contrivance or a plot hole or some such thing. But how do you actually determine if that's the case? How do you determine if something is a problem with the actual storytelling, or if it's just something you had to maybe think through a little bit and it can actually make sense without needing to rely on jumping through too many hoops, basically? Well, there's actually a pretty interesting way you can determine that sort of thing. And I got this from, of all places, listening to a former forensics detective, like a criminal investigator kind of guy. This investigator has said that the way you tell that a room with a dead body in it is actually a crime scene is you have to ask questions and see if those questions lead to answers that take you out of the room. Because if you just find a room with a dead body in it, I mean, it's unfortunate, but it's not necessarily that bizarre. A person can die in a room. That just happens. Now, if you have the dead body but the throat has been cut, well, horrible way to go, but a person can easily do that to themselves. And by the way, do not do it to yourself, please. Your life is worth living. However, if you have a dead body in the room with a slit throat and you can't find the blade, well, that's a little weird. You have to scour the room, of course, to make absolutely sure it's not in there. But if it's not evidently there, like in the person's hand or on the floor beside them or something, that is definitely unusual. If you have the dead body with the slit throat and you can't find the blade, and there are bloody footprints leading to the door that do not belong to that individual, now you're officially being led outside of the room, and you know that what you're dealing with is the scene of a murder. You see how the logic works here? If you can explain all the events within the confines of the room, then you're not necessarily dealing with something nefarious, something tragic, yes, but not necessarily nefarious. But it's when the questions lead you outside of the room that you realize foul play is afoot. So how do we apply that to the subject of storytelling? Look, we have to acknowledge up front that every single fictional story ever is a sequence of events that happens because the storyteller deemed it so. So there's always a level of control there. Everything happens because that's what the storyteller says happens. And we have to acknowledge that, but a well-told story doesn't feel like it was being told in a fictional sense. A really well-told story can feel like it's just the natural way events would happen. And the job of any storyteller is to make the story play out that way. Of course, sometimes, as I mentioned, something might get overlooked. Events might still play out a particular way, but you might be left scratching your head and thinking, wait, how did we get from this point to that point? Feels like there was something missing in there. And that can be the result of anything. The question is, can we actually apply this same idea of questions that lead you outside the room to this? Now, we do have to change the terms a little bit here. In our purposes for storytelling, the room will be the world in which the story takes place. A world that has its own rules, its own characters with their own forms of logic, their own ways of doing things. Basically, every well-realized fictional world has a set of rules that it goes by. And naturally, of course, those rules are going to vary from different works. If you're dealing with something that's like a screwball, zany cartoon, then obviously you're allowed to get away with more stuff and you're not supposed to think about the logic of it. The coyote blew himself up, but he's fine in the next scene. Why did that happen? Well, because the effects of the blast didn't last, and they didn't last because it's a cartoon. Don't overthink it. But if we're dealing with something a little more grounded, and you have a character who gets blown up in an explosion, and somehow he's better in the very next shot, well, then you gotta come up with an actual reason as to why. And if there is no reason other than because the character has to be better in the next shot, well, then we've gone into the realm of being taken out of the room. Only in this case, it's not because there was a murderer, it's because there was a storyteller, and the storyteller couldn't think of another reason for this progression of events other than because that's the progression that was deemed to be what the storyteller wanted. The storyteller wants to get from point A to point Z, and if that means they have to jump all over the alphabet and skip a few letters to get there, then so be it. And that's where you get to things like contrivances and plot holes. But then again, I'm just rambling about it at this point. Can I actually demonstrate what I'm talking about? Well, hopefully I can. One of the more infamous plot holes in recent years comes from Christopher Nolan's third Dark Knight movie, The Dark Knight Rises, in which Bruce Wayne escapes from that prison that's in an unspecified location in the Middle East, presumably somewhere in the Middle East or Southeast Asia, whatever. It's on the other side of the world from Gotham, where he wants to get to. And somehow, after getting out of that prison, he gets from there to Gotham. Now, how does he get there? The movie never actually explains it. Moreover, it's introduced all kinds of different little details that make him getting from the prison to Gotham much harder than just hitching a ride. For example, by this point in the movie, in fact, by about the halfway point, Bruce Wayne's money is gone. He is financially bankrupt. He doesn't have a penny to his name. He is no longer a millionaire playboy because he is no longer a millionaire. He has also been declared legally dead. As far as anyone else knows, Bruce Wayne was killed during that initial attack on Gotham by the League of Assassins. Furthermore, Bruce doesn't have any of his other resources. Obviously, Bane was not going to leave him in this prison with his utility belt and his gauntlets and stuff. So he's got nothing on him. Presumably, he also wouldn't have any identity, any way to identify him. He wouldn't have his wallet, so he wouldn't have his driver's license or his passport or anything. Why would he have those things? He's in a prison. He's supposed to be one of dozens, if not hundreds, of anonymous prisoners in there. So, Bruce Wayne is well and truly stuck. This is not as simple as him just walking from one location to the other, Patrick. He's got to do a lot more to get from one location to the other. Can we actually explain it without having to leave the room? That is, without saying that he got there because the plot needs him to get there. Well, one popular explanation that fans have put forward is that he probably had some sort of connection he made during his world travels where he was training to become Batman, so he might have found one of those guys and gotten that person to bring him back. Now, here's the thing. There's nothing in the movie to suggest that's the case. First of all, we get a pretty good look at the sequence of events for his origins in Batman Begins, and it doesn't seem like he's in an area where he would have traveled during that movie. Even if we factor in the animated Batman Gotham Knight midquel, which I don't think people do anymore, because it doesn't, even though it was originally supposed to be part of the Dark Knight series, it doesn't quite line up with it. But even if we were to factor that in, he still doesn't appear to be in that location. He spends most of his time in Southeast Asia, in the Asian territories, that sort of, like India, Tibet, China, those places. So he doesn't appear to be in the Middle East anywhere, and that is where this particular prison appears to be. Again, it's not really specified, but you look at the surroundings once he's out, that is kind of where it looks like. Now, he could have made connections during his travels, sure, but let's not forget he was traveling incognito in the Dark Knight universe. He had actually faked his death back then, so he could disappear and move about unimpeded. So we don't necessarily know if he would have made any connections during his travels as Bruce Wayne. He might have known certain millionaires because he ran in those circles who could be traveling in any particular area, sure. But first of all, that requires us to invent a completely new character who's not officially in the movie. And even if that character does exist, we have another problem. As mentioned, Bruce Wayne is dead. Well, legally dead. He was declared so in order to get him out of the way. So, picture this. You're a millionaire traveling abroad. You hear about all that mess in Gotham, and one of the guys you knew kicked it because the League got to him. You're thinking, oh, that's too bad. Bruce was a quirky guy. And then all of a sudden, after hearing this news, you have this guy approach you on the tarmac and go, hey, I'm Bruce Wayne. Long story about how I got here, but can I hitch a ride back to Gotham? Are you going to believe him? Probably not, right? You're probably going to think this is some kind of scam artist who's trying to bum a ride off of you. You're not going to believe him, especially if he doesn't have a way to identify himself or prove with absolute certainty that he is Bruce Wayne. So that explanation doesn't really fit. We could take into account the fact that he was trained in the ways of stealth and ninja techniques of disappearing and whatnot, so it's not beyond the realm of possibility that he might have just found a way to sneak aboard a boat or a plane or something and just hung out there as it was on its way to Gotham without being noticed. But again, we're then left with wondering how he was able to still travel, because he doesn't appear to be anywhere near an ocean or an airport, so he's still got to get to a location that has one of those vehicles, and then he has to remain unseen for an unspecified period of time, and once he's back at Gotham, he somehow has to still get to all of his equipment in the Batcave, which for some reason has been left untouched by the League of Assassins. And once he's got all of that, he still somehow has time to sneak onto a bridge and do his flaming modern art piece that will light up at a specific time, and get back in time to save Jim Gordon and the honest cops from death by exile. There's just too much going on, and not enough of an explanation provided for how he's able to do it. Especially when you consider that the Dark Knight movies are supposed to be realistic. That's one of the selling points. This was realistic Batman. And yet all of this is happening? It really does feel like the primary reason he's able to get from that prison back to Gotham is because he has to for the finale. Otherwise, the movie ends there. Or it ends in such a way where he's not able to actually save anyone. So we can see in this case that does actually count as a plot hole. It doesn't make sense for him to get from point A to point B without just saying they needed him to be there. The initial video and my initial comment responding to a certain point was about Godzilla vs. Kong. And the point I zeroed in on, in particular, was what C. Animus refers to as the trailer shot. You know, the final shot from that first trailer, where Kong is leaping through the air, axe above his head, Godzilla's heat ray is hitting the blade, and it's slow motion as he brings the axe down, and it flashes right before the title. Of course, in the movie, it flashes, and then Kong gets sent that way, Godzilla gets sent that way. Now, the questions C. Animus brought up are things like, why was Godzilla aiming at the axe instead of any other part of Kong? Why does Kong not actually kill Godzilla if he intended to have a kill shot there? Why does Kong not immediately start wailing on Godzilla as soon as Godzilla is down? And why doesn't Kong recover the axe? Those are 4 very interesting questions. And they could be seen as just contrivance so the movie can end a particular way, unless, of course, we can find ways to explain them without leaving the room. So can we do that? Let's find out. First of all, as far as Godzilla aiming at the axe, he's not. We can see, if you watch the scene, Godzilla's head doesn't really change position for the whole scene. It moves a little bit, so he's not just standing there static, but it's not like he's specifically looking at the axe. In fact, what we see is that the beam, his heat ray, is drawn to the axe blade. For some reason, it's not explained in the movie at all, but the blade just seems to draw Godzilla's heat ray to it, regardless of where he initially was aiming. It's almost magnetic, for lack of a better term. So, even though it's unexplained, that seems to be one of the properties of this weapon. It's just how the axe works. It's kind of like how in the original Star Wars movies, lightsabers don't actually cast light despite being made of light. They have a glow to them, but that glow doesn't reflect on the people holding them, or the people that they're opposing, or any area of the room. It doesn't get explained, but that's how lightsabers work, at least until Disney got a hold of them. So, we have to assume, therefore, that's just how the blade works. Godzilla was not aiming at Kong, but his heat ray was drawn to the blade, so we're still in the room. That is, it's a weird thing to think of, but if that's how it works, then that's how it works. Did Kong actually intend to kill Godzilla, and if so, why didn't he? Did the axe just not work? Well, this one I can understand people missing, because it's really hard to see. That flash is so bright you don't really get a good look at what happens, but from what I've been told, if you slow the shot down enough, and you have a really good look at it, you'll see that the blade doesn't actually connect with Godzilla. I have no doubt that Kong did intend to land a death blow. Let's face it, you don't swing an axe at somebody's head unless you intend to kill them. But he missed. Maybe it was because of that explosion. The closer the axe got to the source of the beam that was powering it, the more charged it got, and it had been absorbing a lot already, and there just had to be a release. So, whatever the case, the blade did not hit Godzilla. So, that's just what happened. So it's still in the room. Why didn't Kong go after Godzilla as soon as he knew Godzilla was down? Well, one particular thing we have to consider, and I'm not going to hang my hat on this, but it's possible that we're not viewing everything that happens in the movie in real time. You see, right after this particular event happens, and we see Kong get back up, we cut to back inside the Apex facility where Team Godzilla catches up with Walter Simmons and starts getting an introduction to his evil plan. Now, it could be that we're looking at this happening in real time, and as soon as Kong gets back up, that's when Team Godzilla gets brought into that room. Or it could be that the scene in the Apex facility is happening at the same time as this fight, and we're just not seeing it at the same time because that's not how movies work. But that's really hard to prove, so I'm not going to hang my hat on that. What I think makes more sense, however, is that We know the blast, yes, sent Godzilla falling flat on his back, but it also sent Kong flying like the world's biggest ragdoll. And he hit several buildings on his way down. Knowing that Kong is not as durable as Godzilla, he probably, even though he got back up first, still needed a moment to catch his breath. I mean, in boxing, that's the point of going to your corners. You're not just fighting the whole way through, you have rounds so that both of the fighters have a chance to sort of recover. And I know this isn't technically a real boxing match, but Kong still has an opportunity to catch his breath and maybe shake the debris off of him. And he probably, like I said, probably not that much time passes. If it really is happening in real time and the 2 or 3 minutes we're in the Apex facility, Kong is just farting around Hong Kong waiting for Godzilla to get back up, then yeah, that's pretty bad. But if it's only meant to be a couple of seconds, because the scenes are happening simultaneously, Kong's better off catching his breath and getting into a new position. So, again, I think we're still in the room here. What about why he doesn't recover the axe? Well, there could be several reasons. First of all, we know that the axe lost its charge after that blast. And since Kong knows the difference between when the axe is charged and when the axe is not charged, he might think it's no longer usable. We also have to consider the fact that Kong hit Godzilla with the axe twice. Once hitting him in the leg and piercing his skin, and once delivering the full force of Godzilla's atomic breath back at him. And none of those seem to have actually done much damage to Godzilla. Godzilla's wounded physically, but he's still walking around. Godzilla gets knocked down, but he's not dead, and the blade clearly did not hit his head and either split it or sever it like Kong wanted to. Kong could be looking at that and thinking, he used the axe to the best of its ability and it's not working, so time to change tactics. And of course, as mentioned, the same blast that laid Godzilla flat also sent Kong halfway across the city. You gotta think that maybe he's not too fond of using the axe this way anymore. If I were in a fight with someone and I was allowed to use a weapon that delivered a powerful electric charge, but it would also shock me too every time I used it, eventually I'd stop using it. I mean, maybe that's just me. I'm not a masochist as far as I know. But I wouldn't necessarily want to be hurt by my own weapon every time I try using it to hurt the other guy. The point is to hurt the other guy only and not get hurt yourself. So he might have abandoned the axe because it's not worth the harm it causes him in the hopes of also harming his enemy. But all of that stuff is just a very complicated answer, and there's also a much simpler answer that says the axe got knocked out of Kong's hands, he doesn't know where it landed, and the time he could spend looking for it in all the rubble is better spent getting into a different position for when Godzilla gets back up. Now yes, I realize I could be making a lot of assumptions here, but from my perspective, I'm seeing that we can explain this particular event with stuff that remains in the room. Again, it was all orchestrated by writers, yes, but in terms of if we looked at the story as just stuff that happens, we can see that it is technically explainable. Now, bear in mind, I'm not saying all of this because I want to prove C. Animus wrong or something like that. He's entitled to his opinion just as I am entitled to mine, and you're entitled to yours, and anyone else is entitled to theirs, as long as it actually can be supported. I'm more bringing this up because I think it's an interesting thought experiment, a way to sort of enhance your ability of analyzing pop culture and mass media. Like I said, there are contrivances and plot holes in fiction, but how do you really determine what those are? Ever since the debate started in earnest online, there's been kind of a murky area in that regard, where people do think that contrivances and plot holes are important, but not everybody necessarily knows exactly how to define them. Plenty of people do, but if you have a hard time with it, this is one way to determine if something genuinely is a plot hole or a contrivance. Take it and think, okay, if this was a real sequence of events and not just a fictional story, Could we explain everything and have it make sense without having to say, there's a scene missing, or the writer said it had to be this way? So if you look at it that way, who knows what you might find. It's an interesting method, I think. Maybe it's not the only method, but it's one you might find useful. So I wanted to put it out there, give some demonstrations of it, and how you use this method, if you use it at all, well, that's entirely up to you. I just wanted to share it with you guys. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. Thank you all for watching. Now be sure to head down to the description to check us out on other platforms, as well as find links to the 5 current books in the Tales from the Omni Vault universe. Again, thank you all, and we'll see you next time.